There are a lot of organizations out there that have recognized that one of the most impactful things that we can do in terms of both sustainability and resilience of our urban areas is to increase urban farming. Yet we're at a time when urban farming is struggling. We're losing a lot of our urban farms, and urban farming is if anything, on the decline. Hi, welcome to the Lear Innovations channel. My name is Edmund Williams, and today I'm going to talk about why that's happening and what we can do to create a new movement around urban farming. So, the first thing I want to talk about is context sensitivity. One of the core principles of agriculture is that anytime you want to grow something, it has to be sensitive to the context of where you're growing it. For example, we would never start a banana plantation in Alaska. It's not sensitive to the environmental conditions of where you're trying to produce the agriculture. But environmental context isn't the only form of context that's important. And in fact, urban versus rural is one that's largely being ignored. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing is that the situation in urban versus rural are very different, specifically around the areas of people and land. So in a rural area, people are scarce, they're farther apart, they don't necessarily want to commute 40, 60 miles or whatever to the farm. So most of them either live on the farm or live very close to the farm. And so you get just a handful of people who can operate on the farm and help run it. And so you're limited not just in terms of labor force, but in terms of the skills of the people that you can attract and what it is they're good at. The other piece on a rural farm is that land is plentiful. So you can afford to spread out on the land and be inefficient in the ways that you're growing things. It's the cost of the land is conducive to that. In an urban area, both of those things are opposite. Number one, the land is very scarce, so you have to be very efficient on the land and producing the maximum that you possibly can just to make the operation worth it. But then at the same time, people are very, very plentiful. You know, you can find sometimes thousands of people within just a square mile or two that you could potentially use as a labor force. And so actually one of the things that happens around that is that you see in a lot of urban areas around urban agriculture, you get a community that forms as a support. So you may get somebody who's building gardens, another person who's processing soil, creating plant starts. Maybe you have organizations that are collecting the food to be sold. There's a lot of that's already happening, but there's a lot of opportunity to create that on a larger scale. So one of the big things then is with that land being a lot more scarce. We need to kind of look at land use. And so what tends to happen then in an urban area, so in a rural farm, you've got a land, you say, typically 15 to 100 acres at a minimum, depending on what you're growing and how you're operating your land. That's going to be the minimum viable amount of land. So in an urban area, that 15 acres is big enough to put an apartment complex on. And if you've got some tightness of the land, one of the things one of the terms that urban planners like to use is best and highest use. And if you look at a chart of what the best and highest use, the very bottom of that chart, way at the bottom, is agricultural. And so an urban planner looks at a field and they say, how do we get that out? And they have a lot of ways to apply pressure when the growth has constrained to a point where that field is holding back growth. And so they'll buy the land out from under the farmer. If it's rented, the zoning commission will start applying pressure. There's a lot of different ways that they can do that, and that's actually how we're losing a lot of our urban farms. It's coming straight from the planners and the developers that just see that as not a viable source of land. But in urban areas, we do not lack for abundant land to grow. It's just the big parcels that somebody else has their eye on. But in a lot of areas, certainly in where I am in the Phoenix, Arizona area, we have a lot of urban sprawl. And so this is something that's from a sustainability standpoint, seen as very detrimental to the environment. But I would argue that if you've got a quarter acre lot, the chance that you have 1,000 to 2,000 square feet that you can convert into backyard or even potentially front yard farming is very, very high. And so, that's certainly an opportunity. But now, one of the nice things about that is that that land is untouchable by developers. Urban planners do not have it on their radar. That area, unless the plan is to remove the neighborhood and put in some other use, which is usually a last resort anyway, that's not something that the urban planners are interested in. They're not looking at it. And of course, you can't develop, come in and put a shop in somebody's backyard. That backyard is under the control of the person who lives in that house. And so creating those as small, high impact urban farms is where I think we should be really looking at this opportunity for increasing urban farming. And so the big question then becomes, how do we make that happen? How do we make that viable? And I would argue that there's three things that we need to make that happen. The first is that we need a form of technology that's going to make it more viable. That technology needs to be low maintenance. It needs to be highly productive. It needs to be sustainable, certainly. And it needs to be profitable enough for it to be very low risk, or even ideally no risk. So if you tell somebody, hey, you can put this system into your backyard and guarantee that you're going to be able to produce something that's going to at least offset the costs of the system, that's going to be really, really important. Because one of the things that's happening is that we have a lot of people who are potentially interested in growing their own food but have no idea how to do that. So they are going to need some level of support. They're going to need some level of assurances because they're heading into an area that's very, very scary. That brings me to item number 2 on this particular list, and that is community support. The second thing that people need is they need to know that they have the support of their community. They need to go to somebody and say, hey, how do I design my space? How do I build the garden? How do I create? How do I plant? How do I harvest? How do I market? Where can a lot of this help come from? And there are, in most urban areas, those experts are there. We just need to make them more accessible, make them more visible, create a system that's going to allow that community to operate in the way that it really wants to operate. Okay, one of the big ways that's going to be really important for a backyard farmer. Now, if you've got a backyard, say homesteader, where they're going to produce an abundance of food, and then they're going to can it, and then they're going to store it, and they're going to use their freeze dryer, all in their suburban area, that's awesome. They're absolutely taking the pressure off the food system, but they don't necessarily need to find markets for the produce that they're creating. Now, farmers markets certainly are viable, but they're not necessarily big enough. I don't think they're enough to really sell all of your produce. I think that we need markets that we can have as a drop point where somebody can reach out then and become a distributor. That especially works really well if you're not just counting on one farmer. If you've actually got a movement that's going on, and where you have a lot of different farmers, maybe hundreds of farmers that are saying, hey, I've got all of this produce and I need to just, hey, I've got a couple of hours on a Thursday night. I'm going to harvest a bunch of stuff and then deliver that Friday morning to the local food co-op or whatever you call it. And then that food co-op buys the food from them, and they get the income without having to try and find customers and deal with all of the legalities. The food co-op can handle all of that. So that's something that's going to be really, really important if we want to create that backyard farming movement, is that whole community around food production. The third thing that we need to do is we need to find is funding. Now, certainly there are some amount of grants out there. I think loans are a little bit easier. There were FDA loans. The USDA, rather, I believe, is the place. The USDA had some loans. I don't know with the current administration if those are available, but there are other organizations that do loans. But then we need to if we're going to give a farmer a loan, then we need to find a way to pay that loan back. The garden needs to be profitable enough that it is paying for itself. And so a lot of these are ways that we need to problems that we're going to need to solve to make urban farming more viable. And just a little bit of a spoiler alert, a Lear garden was designed as that method. It does all of those things that I mentioned that we need the technology to do. And one of the really cool things about the Lear garden is that the output of the soil actually has enough. Most of those farm loans are going to have about a 7-year life cycle, and the soil output is alone, not even counting the vegetables. If we can find the markets for that, open the markets for that, is going to be able to pay off the loan for the building of that farm in probably as little as 4 to 5 years. So with a reasonable elbow room in terms of that USDA farm loan. So this is something we're definitely working on, and we would love to see more movement in this. Certainly those communities, not something that we can create, but here in Phoenix, I'm working to foster those. We've met a lot of really amazing people who are doing amazing work, and we'd love to see that continue.